Well, good afternoon, brethren. I want to welcome and thank everyone for tuning in and joining us from the various locations from around the world for the broadcast of today's Sabbath message. Today's message will be delivered by David J. Smith, and it is titled, The Middle East Trap for America. And I'm your host today, Tim West. This is message number 1183. David J. first delivered this message on May 1st, 2004. Today's message is very interesting. David J. mentions a few things that are even more pertinent today than they were 15 years ago when he first delivered this message. The title itself holds true today. See how many things you can pick out that are relevant today. So let's get right into the message. Grab something to sip on, some lunch, or your favorite snack. Find a comfortable place to relax and enjoy today's message.
For those who have been watching world events in the light of Bible prophecy, May 1st means something to them. They understand that the Illuminati, which is worshipers of Satan and Lucifer, are the very ones who started the drive for the end-time world government. It was called the Order of the Illuminati, and a direct descendant of that order is the Order of Skull and Bones in the United States, in which both presidential candidates for the year 2004 or 2005 will be a member of those organizations. So May 1st is very important. It's called May Day, the world over. On May 1st, 2004, something very important happened in the world. The European Union celebrated 10 more nations going into it with flag ceremonies given to each country, and they raised them, and the final flag was that of the European Union. And so this fulfills Bible prophecy, one more step toward it, showing that we are moving in that direction. And then the attorney for Saddam Hussein has come forward on 60 Minutes and stated very clearly that Donald Rumsfeld was the very person who has gone into the Middle East back in 1983 and 1984 and brokered deals, weapons of mass destruction sold by the United States of America to Saddam Hussein. And his attorney will be defending him, showing all of these things. But then something else that is going to be very interesting, and it will affect every person that ever uses a hospital in the United States. The Privacy Act that has now been passed into law in America. Any patient who requests that the hospital contact their church so they can be put on a prayer list or be prayed for, that church, because it will be violating patient privacy, will be fined a minimum of $250,000. This is just one more step to destroy religion in America. The bill that I mentioned one other time, C-250 in Canada, has already passed. Now the Bible, if you speak of it openly, out loud to audiences and say that homosexuality is a sin, it is now a fine, and is now possible prison terms for anyone who says that openly to the public. With all this in mind, that we are accelerating Bible prophecy, and it's happening faster and faster, even though sometimes we don't see the evidence of it, and we have to dig down deep to find it. The Bible does foretell of something that is going to affect every single person in America, whether they like it or not. It'll affect many people in Russia, the former Soviet Union. It'll affect all of China, the people that live there. It'll affect all the Middle East. And the Bible begins to talk about it. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 24, because a great deal of the Bible is prophecy. Verse 1 to 3, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple. His disciples came to him to show him the buildings, the fantastic structure that was there. And Jesus said unto them, See you now not all of these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left one stone left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Verse 3, so he took his disciples to a private location, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? Yes, when shall the temple be destroyed? What shall be the sign of your coming to establish the kingdom of God and of the end of the world? Yes, the end of time when Satan will be ruling instead of Jesus Christ. He wanted to know. And so one portion that I want to mention today in Matthew 24 is verse 15 to 22 that deals with the Middle East. Because when we understand that there is problems in the Middle East today, are they even mentioned in the Bible? Are they foretold? How are the problems that are going to occur in the Middle East coming into fruition? Verse 15, when you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Now this will be in the last 3.5 years, the beginning of it. Let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. These are the ones that have the Holy Spirit, that understand the prophecies, that know there are things in the Middle East that are coming down that nobody wants to be a participant in. Let him which is on the rooftop not come down to take anything out of his house. Pretty serious conditions. Neither let him that is in the field return back to take clothes. And woe unto them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. It's going to be difficult to be a young mother. Verse 20, but pray that your flight or getting out of the Middle East, Jerusalem, will not be in winter, nor either on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world of this time, no, nor shall ever be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So there is something coming in the Middle East. And the Middle East is the very thing that signifies the end of the age for us. No matter what is happening the rest of the world, the Middle East, and when all of these events begin to occur there, this is the sign that there are also going to be other detailed plans, because we know there is going to be a world government. And so in Daniel 9, verse 24 to 27, I'll not turn there today, but it deals with this abomination of desolation. And it shows that there's going to be some kind of a treaty in the Middle East for 7 years. And in the middle of that 7th year, or in the middle of the 7 years, their week of years. So for each day in a week, it's a year, because the Hebrew word Shabbat reflects that. And in the middle of that 7, which is 3.5 years, that's when this person will move into the temple, claim to be God, establish himself as world dictator. And this is when this abomination of desolation will be set up. Notice in Daniel chapter 12, the older writings, and yet they're brand new writings. Most of the Old Testament prophecies were closed to the understanding of anyone until the current time in which we live. In Daniel 12, in the middle part of verse 7, it starts talking about an angel that sware by him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. So there's 3.5 times, that's years. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Now the holy people congregate into 2 different sections, and I'll read verse 8 and 9 in just a moment. But number 1, you have the northern 10 tribes of Israel that was taken into captivity. They were sifted through the nations. They became nations of their own today. They received the birthright promises that was given in the Bible. And so they are the ones that the gospel was preached to through Joseph of Arimathea when he took his people in that little boat. And they were set out to sail across the Mediterranean. And they landed in Spain and came on over into Great Britain and began to preach and establish the first above ground home or church, in a Christian church in the world. And so it is, Great Britain and the United States have taken the Bible around the world. They've sent in the Queen Victorian era. Her desire was to have the Bible preached all over the world. And so she sent out missionaries from England. And that was basically done through the efforts of those people. But then the scattering of these people, God's people, the church also. And then you also have little tiny Israel in the Middle East, that some, about 10% of the population, are Judites from the real tribe of Judah. Others are proselytes from foreign countries, other nationalities, but they accepted Judaism as a religion. And so the Bible shows that all of these people are going to be the target for the end of the age. So there is going to be the last 3.5 years, there's going to be the scattering of the holy people. Verse 8 of Daniel 12. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So the time of the end is when we'll understand the books of Daniel, the books of Ezekiel, and all the other prophets that has to do with the close of the age. Verse 13, But go your way till the end be. You shall rest and shall stand in your lot in the end of the days. The key is, I've already mentioned, who are these holy people? They were the northern 10 tribes of Israel, sifted through the nations. They were also Judah that went back first into the Middle East to be regathered. In order for anyone who may be new to these words today to understand this, you should get our 500-page book, The History of God's People in the Coming New World Order. It will absolutely prove from historical documentation who it is the holy people are. In the New Testament of the Bible, Mark 13, verse 14 to 20 is nothing more than a regiving of Matthew chapter 24. And it once again corresponds exactly with this Middle Eastern scenario. However, Luke chapter 21 takes us a little more into detail. Verse 20 to 24. Luke 21, verse 20 to 24. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed, and the word compass means surrounded with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Something is going to force the surrounding of Jerusalem for its protection, or else it will be annihilated. The Bible doesn't go into detail exactly as to what it is that forces this surrounding of Jerusalem. So we have to look and fill in the blanks based upon world conditions. Verse 22, For these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. They shall fall to the edge of the sword. So it's going to be a time of the Gentiles when foreign nations of another nationality is going to come into Jerusalem and occupy it. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. What is going to lead to this surrounding of Jerusalem? What could be a possibility of leading up to it? What could be the possibility of anyone surviving in the Middle East as a Christian when all of this happens? Because we have Islamics in the Middle East that it's illegal to be a Christian and to teach any other teachings other than Islam. Then you have Judaism, which even though they allow Christians there, they're very, very prejudiced toward Christians. And so it's not a pleasant place to be in the Middle East. The Middle East has been violent. It's been unstable. It's been a tumultuous region of the world for centuries. Does anyone doubt that the Middle East and the struggle for world survival is the most unstable region in the world today? It's been that way for thousands of years. There's been wars. When those of the European continent wanted to overthrow Jerusalem and take back their holy sites, they would have wars with the Islamics. Yes, the Arab people have been unstable. They've been warring type groups since the days of Ishmael, who was Abraham's son by Hagar. Notice what it says in Genesis chapter 16 concerning Ishmael and what his future would be. Genesis chapter 16, verse 11 and verse 12. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, you're with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard your affliction. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Yes, his brethren happen to be Israelites. You have the Jews, nickname for Judah in the Middle East today. Then you have America, that has a great deal of Islamic population, and it's growing. And so they're dwelling in the midst of their brethren, Israel, as well as the 12 tribes with their own territories in the Middle East. This instability has grown dramatically with the advent of the 7th century, when Muhammad began to receive dictations from a source that he didn't know whether it was a demon or whether it was God. His wife convinced him that it was from God, but he never was sure himself. So violence began, bloodshed began, annihilation of all the enemies of Allah began to take place. It's called jihad, or holy war. There's approximately 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. And out of those, there's an estimated 85% that are moderate, that are peaceful, that does not believe in taking the armed forces against their neighbors. But there's 15% that are very radical. They hate Western culture. They believe that America is evil, it is degenerate. They want to destroy the United States of America. Their focal point of all their anger and all of their hatred is the export of Western culture into their Islamic states in the Middle East. To be exact, they even call us the great Satan, and they believe we are because of what we transport to them by television, by records, music. 15% of 1.2 billion people is approximately 180 million radical fundamentalists in the world today. They hate Israelis. They've been murdering them ever since the Israeli state was placed right in the middle of them, 1948, May 14th of that year, as a mandate of the United Nations organization. And then there are moderate Palestinians. They've been killing them that cooperate with Israel to try to make it a workable solution in the Middle East. They have been blowing up skyscrapers. They've been blowing up buildings all over the world. They've been blowing up nightclubs such as Bali in 2002 that killed many people. They have actually beheaded Christian missionaries in southern Philippines in the year 2004. They've been killing Iraqi moderates, those who do not want war in the Middle East, but they want to live in peace. Anyone who cooperates with the American troops there to create stability, they are now the target. There is a pattern, the same pattern that followed that in South Africa when the African National Congress, a communist organization, was there. They targeted anyone that cooperated with the South African white government to foster integration and to work within the system to make it work. They said, we want to make this country ungovernable. That way they could overthrow it for international communism. And so what do we have today? Nelson Mandela, when they overthrew South Africa for communism, he became the head of it until finally he stepped down. So let's go back into the 1970s. Let's remember that there have been many training camps since the 1966 meeting in Cuba, when all of those individuals came from every continent on earth. They were revolutionaries. They wanted to have revolutionary terrorist activity and terrorist cells on every continent to overthrow every government on the face of the earth. All the way back in the 70s was when all this really got a good start. Even though most of these 180 million radical fundamentalists are not yet ready to be suicide bombers or terrorists, they still hate America. They're in sympathetic standing with the cause of this Islamic jihad against America, Great Britain, Western Europe, anyone that stands in their way, because the whole world has to become worshipers of Allah. That is their goal. That is their mission. They have no other one that they want anyone in the world to worship, not Jesus Christ, certainly not Him. And this is why Satan is behind the scenes working. We know that anytime there's a movement in the world to stamp out Christianity, there has to be an unseen hand behind it. It is Satan, his demons, because they hate Jesus Christ, who is redeeming the world and has a plan to redeem the whole world to Himself. Into this very hostile, highly volatile Middle East region and the world of Islam, America has now inserted almost 250,000 troops, military personnel. There's been at least 150,000 troops, not counting others that are support for those troops. And the war has not ended, even though it was announced so, at least the first phase of the war, at the end of April, on May 1st of the year 2003. But winning the conventional war in the country of Iraq is not easy, especially since a large part of Saddam Hussein's army never fought back. The United States thought it was going to be a cakewalk. They would march right in, take over, no problems. But these men that were in the military for Saddam Hussein, the great majority of them, simply took off their uniforms. They put on civilian clothes. They melted right into the crowd. They looked just like any other person on the street, Mr. or Mrs. Private Citizen. They said they would wait for another day and they would fight America, but it would be on their own terms. It would be a long-term guerrilla war. And this would maintain a war of attrition, the killing off little by little of all the American, as they call it, imperialist occupation forces. Those are their words. Unfortunately for America, another day has arrived, and the American and British troops now find themselves in a war against armed guerrillas, and it seems like there's no end to them. It's just like what we involved ourselves in when we went into Vietnam. You couldn't find an enemy. They looked just like every other person on the street. And yet now in the Middle East, radical Islamics are volunteering from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Palestine, the Palestine Liberation Organization, that is, Pakistan, Indonesia. They're even coming from the Philippines and around the world to join in this jihad war, the holy war against America and Britain. They don't reject martyrdom for their cause. They believe that they have a great struggle in which they have to liberate the world from American imperialism or the great Satan. So these young people who are very hate-prone toward America, this 180 million Muslims, are now beginning to train little by little. And so that there now is an endless number of potential martyrdoms for Islam. They hate America. Therefore, they will continue to train, and they will be willing to give their lives so that just one or two more American or British troops will die today. Another 15 or 20 will be wounded, and they will prolong the war as long as necessary until the United States finally decides to give up. They saw that in Vietnam. America finally grew weary and withdrew after over 50,000, approximately 55,000 died and another 500,000 wounded. So the U.S. military is now facing tens of thousands of Saddam loyalists. They're the former Republican guards, they're the Ba'athist Party members, Sunni Muslims, and even a large growing number of radical Shiites. They're all joining in the war, the front lines. But the front lines to them are hidden. They look like civilians. America can't go in and just pick out the military. And so they go door to door and trying to find the people, and they can't. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job to hunt down these potential tens of thousands that are melded into the crowd, and you can't tell any difference in them. Yes, it's in this quagmire of warring factions, this religious war that is now going on, that have been killing one another for hundreds of years, that America has gone into it. Yes, they have no concept whatsoever of Western-style government. And so what we're trying to do is not appreciated except by a small element, but the radicals do not appreciate it. They've lived for years and years under dictators in the Middle East because of their religion. They've lived under monarchs and mullahs since the time of Muhammad. They have not had a free government as you and I have. It's a country and a region which America's leaders have decided to create Western-style government. And they hope that Western-style government will spread around the Islamic world. But we have problems. That is, they don't want America in the Middle East. A small number do. Some, but not the vast majority. Building a new nation in this very unstable, volatile environment where religious passions can run higher than anything we've ever known in America is very dangerous for those who go there. They don't understand the tradition of freedom that you and I have. So it's very likely that it's going to be difficult and very expensive in terms of financing for the United States to ever build a democratic country in the Middle East, especially Islam. It'll mean the sacrifice of thousands of lives eventually. We've already reached the first 1,000. Will it go on? Yes, the official estimate of money that now will go in try to fight the Iraqi war and also the Afghanistan war is $5 billion, that's with a B, dollars per month. Our government has already promised another $87 billion that was requested by President Bush. But this war will end up costing us 5 to 10 times as much. Eventually, when the printing presses in America get going, inflation is coming back. The only two organizations on earth that can cause inflation is the Federal Reserve System printing paper money and the federal government authorizing it by borrowing it. You and I do not create inflation. Only the government, by borrowing from the Federal Reserve System, creates inflation. And if you've noticed on the news lately, the head of the Federal Reserve has already said we have to watch out because inflation may be coming back and we may have to start raising interest rates. Well, he's warning the people that the war is going to speed up. More money is going into the Middle East. So he's getting the minds of the American people already set to accept inflation. Because if you run up a $500 billion or $1 trillion bill in fighting a foreign war, you have to run the printing presses 24 hours a day. They will get no rest. Meanwhile, American troops that are pretending to be peacekeepers are the new targets of Iraq. the Iraqi radicals, with 1 or 2 soldiers dying every single day, and then another 10 or 12 wounded here or there. Over 1,000 now is the official count that have died since the war ended, supposedly ended at the end of April, May 1st of the year 2003. And so unofficial estimates of the wounded is a very sensitive thing. It is something that the government does not want the average American person to know about. They don't want us to know what is really happening in the Middle East. But some of these young boys who are coming home and fighting don't want to go back. The morale is already low after only 1 year after the war ended. And so regulars, reservists, National Guard troops are having their tours in Iraq doubled, tripled, extended, instead of 3 months to a year. And the morale, once again, is low. They're targets because when you have a civilian government, civilian army, in civilian clothes, and you're terrorists, nobody knows who is going to be the one to set the next bomb off and blow your legs off. So there is no one for the military to take target upon. This is what we're facing, just like it was in Vietnam. But what has happened in the Middle East, and this is all leading up to a potential why there's going to be armies surrounding Jerusalem to fulfill Bible prophecy. United States troop morale is sinking, and the Iraqi people are becoming very, very angry, according to newscasts, because ever since the United States took over the rebuilding of their infrastructure, there's been bombs that would blow up their progress. Water, electricity, pipelines, the police forces are all being attacked. Nothing is functioning as well as they were told it would. So their life is miserable with the United States occupation. Unemployment is running rampant in the country. If these setbacks do not discourage the American government, they'll go on. They're now suggesting the doubling of the number of armed forces just in Iraq itself. How would they do that? Where will they come from? They're also, according to the news, on May 1st, 2004, on C-SPAN, they're now wanting to use National Guards to guard the border of America with Mexico. Bring them into police activity in America, which the posse comitatus law prevents. But this is an absolute fact. They're discussing it in the Senate right now and receiving documentation from generals and major generals, lieutenant generals, and so on, and those in the private sector in our government who deal with the National Guard and where they're sent. Iraq is our military base of operations for the entire Middle East right now. At one time it was Saudi Arabia, but now our military is moving it into Iraq, and there's reasons for it. Because Iraq is in the center. It's between Saudi Arabia, between Iran, between Syria. That way the military operations could be deployed instantly to go into any one of those countries that decided they wanted to continue their terrorist activities against the United States. So we're moving into Iraq. No wonder we're going to have to stay there no matter what. And we can't pull out and admit defeat. I'm trying to make this a fair and balanced assessment to bring you to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Because not everything we see on the mainline news media that's controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, that Marxist organization, can be accepted as fact. And so sometimes we have to look deeper to find out what really is going on. The weapons of mass destruction that they started the war over, where are they? They showed on television. I've got it on cassette, on videotape. Mr. Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein after the delivery of weapons of mass destruction. Him being the salesman to sell all of these weapons of mass destruction to Iraq and Iran in the 1980s. And so the United States is the one who's spreading it. And yet we're the very ones that said you've got to dismantle all of your weapons of mass destruction. And that was the reason we gave for going into the Middle East to begin with. Much of the Islamic world is convinced that America is waging a crusade against Islam, their religion, even though our officials deny it. They say we're not. However, what many people call the Judeo-Christian culture and the Islamic culture have been in conflict for many, many years, about 1,400 years to be exact, since the time that Mohammed took his revelations from this spirit. And then between 622 and 632 AD, they began their organizing of the people under Allah. This struggle included the Crusades in the Middle East, Constantinople, and then it included the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the Middle East for 1,500 years, right on down to the present day. The present state of Israel was planted right in the middle of all the Arabs and the Islamics for the very purpose of founding World War III. It was to be the place where World War III would start. So we've seen all during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, we saw terrorists from the state of Israel terrorizing Islamics. We saw Islamics retaliating against Israel. One wanted to maintain a homeland. The other wanted to destroy that homeland. They didn't want there to be a place for both religions in the Middle East. And so you have the most volatile place on earth today. Then we saw there was attacks on the World Trade Center back in 1992. Might have been 3, I can't remember. But anyway, it did not go through as well as they thought it would, and so it only damaged the buildings. A few people injured. But then when you had the Timothy McVeigh and Oklahoma City bombing, people who were totally ignored, even though they said they saw Middle Eastern persons around the building and with Timothy McVeigh, they were totally ignored. These were the same terrorists using someone else so that they could terrorize America, but the blame would not go upon them. And then the same cell went to the World Trade Building on September the 11th, 2001, and they brought them to the ground. So Islamic terrorism is now in the heart of America. It's here to fight America to the death. Islam versus Christianity. Mr. Richard Russell wrote in an article, this was back in August 8th of 2003, he said, quote, "Why is this ancient battle heating up again? In my opinion, it's because Muslims increasingly view Western Judeo-Christian culture as a danger to the Islamic culture." Why a danger? Look, if there's one thing the United States exports to the world, it's United States culture and its mores, its morals. He used it as an example, Hollywood movies that are now going into Islamic states and they're having to root them out, which are seen the world over. Another example, MTV, which is now broadcast around the world. What is it that MTV is broadcasting? Sex, sex, and more sex. Furthermore, when I talk about U.S. culture, I'm referring particularly to the rise and empowerment of Western women. Realize that over in the Middle East, women are second-class citizens. They have no freedoms. They can't even drive cars in Saudi Arabia. And so now the idea that America is transporting around the world is free women. Free them, make them equal. And so this is another threat to their religious system, the Islamic system. It's about not only just political, but it's about sexuality also. The men must be in charge, the little dictators in that country. So this is the concept that is in Islam, that the United States of America and what we're exporting around the world is a threat to them. They take it very seriously. They don't believe that women should go without veils. They should show their faces. Their dress should be down to clothes, even to cover their ankles, their knees, and never show any part of their body other than their eyes in public. They should have no rights. They're not even educated in most countries. This is a threat to Islam, the United States, where everyone is educated. But on June 2nd of year 2003, in a CNBC article, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice praised American values as the organizing principles of the world. But what I'd like to know is, which American values is she referring to? Is it the old tradition, Christian, family-oriented values based upon the Bible? Or is it that of the new values of Hollywood, promiscuity, sponsored pornography? Is it rampant homosexuality, which is disallowed in the Muslim world? Is it 50% divorce rates, which is not allowed in the Islamic world? Is it widespread drug uses and alcoholism, which is disallowed by the Islamic religion? Is it lust for material wealth and for affluence, which is disallowed by the Islamic religion? So MTV and our sex, drug, saturated rock music, it's disallowed in the Islamic religion. Everything based upon the Bible, other than its morals, is rejected. Jesus as the Son of God, as being divine, born into the very family of God as the Son of God, it's all disallowed by the Islamic religion. And then, when all of this was beginning to really take place in the latter part, or mid to the latter part of the 1990s, preparing for all that's going on today, we had an example of those American morals by Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky right in the White House. This is what they do not want brought into their region, so they're willing to go to all-out war. They will fight to the death so that they can eliminate Western culture from their area that will produce another democratic promiscuity society, which they see America being engaged in today. So it's this second set of values, not the biblical values, that they reject. They also see democracy. That's the majority rule. 51 votes beats 49. They see it as mob rule. They don't believe in that. They don't believe that there should be anything except the Koran. That is their constitution. We have a constitutional republic in America. The United States wants them to have a secular constitution government, just like we have. Only they use the word democracy. Democracy is nothing but a cover name for socialism. So they're trying to force a socialistic type of government upon the Middle East. They reject it. They see that they already have their constitution. It's Islamic law called the Koran. This is where they get their governing information from, their judiciary system. Everything they believe in comes from the Koran. And remember, these are fanatical religious people. They're not like Americans who go to their churches and they sit there and they sleep through services, and then because there's nothing ever said, and then they leave and go away the next week. During the week, all they think about is materialism, how to please the flesh, lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Even though these people don't have the right God, they are very dedicated. They're dedicated to the death for what they believe in. And that's why they will not give up. That's why they knew they could not defeat the United States of America with its military arsenal on a head-on fight. They had to resort to the one and only method that could work: terrorist activities where there is no front lines. Iraq is 95% Islamic, with 60 to 65% of that Islamic Muslim being Shiite. For over 1,350 years, the custom in Islamic countries has been to have their governments and their legal systems based upon the Quran. Nothing else. This is why they have dictators in many of those countries. Or it's a theocracy where the religious head runs both the political and the religious sector. A few of these Islamic countries have been partially westernized, such as Turkey and the Shah of Iran, until he was overthrown by the Ayatollah back in the 1980. And then they went their own way and established their theocracy also. They're ruled by Islamic law, nothing else. That's why no one can institute a democratic type of society or a constitutional form of government as we have in this country today. This trend of being a democratic type country is trying to be spread by the United States all over the Middle East, but it's being met with stiff resistance. Just like our own Senator Helms, when he went before the United Nations organization, he told them, look, if you try to take over our national sovereignty, if you try to make us just another part of the United Nations, we're the one that's paying for this operations, 90% of it. And if you try to impose your authority as world government, you'll meet stiff resistance. So Americans have certain things that will offer stiff resistance also. So we have to at least respect, whether we agree with it or not, that these people have a belief system, and they believe that the Quran is what determines their government and their religion, and the Western style of civilization that is based upon nothing but elevating women to the status equal to men. They don't believe in it. Promiscuity all over the country. They don't believe in it. They have absolute laws where if you steal something and you're caught, they cut your hand off. You don't steal again. And it's the same way with every type. They have a rule. And when you violate their laws, you're punished for it. They see in America where criminals go free. If you murder someone, you're out in 6 years on probation. But if you smoke an ounce or 5 ounces of marijuana, you get automatic 6. And so they see that there is a difference in the cultures. They don't want it. They don't want the same type of culture that we have in America. So what we're seeing is basically trained in the 1960s were terrorists. They were trained in Havana, Cuba. They went back to the Middle East, into Libya, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. They set up terrorist training camps. They taught them well. They passed it down to the next generation. The next generation passed it down to the next. And so they were going to use this terrorist activity all over the world until the world became Islamic. And there would be no division. They wanted their own world government. But there are other forces fighting against them. But could it be that the Islamic situation in the Middle East is going to bring about something that is going to be tremendously effective in every one of our lives, but it will be a negative effect? Because who was it that trained the terrorists in the Middle East? Communist Cubans. Communist Russians under KGB and GRU. Those are their secret services. They're the ones that trained them. They provided them funds all through the 1980s so that they could build up their military equipment in the Middle East. They're funding Iran today and helping them to build nuclear weapons. Iraq just got rid of theirs over into Iran or else over into Syria before the United States came in. But what is all this going to do? Could it be that Pakistan, which already has nuclear weapons, Iran, which is on the verge and will have them in a year or two, probably less, could it be that the Soviet Union is the one providing, or former Soviet Union, just known as Russia today, is the one that's providing all the know-how to all these terrorists, to Al-Qaeda, other Islamic states and groups? And this frightens America, our leadership, to think that these rogue nations would be able to gain control of nuclear weapons and smuggle them inside the United States. After all, if they could come through the porous borders of Canada, march right on down and never be caught, and have terrorist activity all over the country, and if they can come up through the border of Mexico, which it's already reported right on CNN, May 1st, 2004, how 1 million illegal aliens now a year is coming through Goldwater country, Arizona. How many of them are communist? They've already captured Chinese wearing full backpacks, plans written in Chinese. America is the target. So how in the world is such a thing as the Middle East going to affect this target nation? If we're supported by Russia, do we have an ally of the Middle East that is now sitting back and watching the whole dumb show take place? America going to the Middle East, being killed off little by little, weakened to where we don't even have the military equipment as we did once before, where our military is now spread all over the world, and we're so thin that we can't defend the homeland. And that's why they're now talking about having the National Guard come in to defend the borders of the homeland. They're not supposed to take part in any police action in America. No military. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 prohibits it. Yet here they are talking about doing it. Everything that is in direct violation to everything that we stood for over 200 years. They're now violating it. But in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 1 to 12, there's something very interesting here. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Meshech is Moscow, modern day. Tubal is Tubalski. And prophesy against them. And say, Thus says the Lord God, I'm against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So this is modern day Russia, Moscow, capital. I will turn you back, put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you forth, and all of your army, horses, horsemen, that's the military apparatus, even a great company with bucklers, shields, and all them handling the swords. Modern day MK-47s, shoulder nuclear missiles, shoulder missiles to shoot down helicopters and so on. Your bombers, MiGs, Russian MiGs that have supplied all of these countries with all their military equipment. And notice who's going to be aligned with Russia, Persia. That's the Middle East, other than Israel. That's Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, where the old Persian Empire used to be. And so we see that Persia is hand in glove with Russia. Russia's the one that trained them in terrorism, prepared them for the day when they would have their jihad war and when the United States could be drawn into the Middle East. And then when we understand the secret societies of the Illuminati, how they infiltrate and control every government on earth practically, so that they can work out arrangements at the specified time when the United States, instead of warring on terrorism, would suddenly just stop and go into Iraq and say they have weapons of mass destruction. Well, sure, they knew they had them. Rumsfeld and Bush, the first Bush in 1989, sold them to him. And the first President Bush's signature is on the documents, even stating which types of material were sold to them. Botulism, anthrax, smallpox, all of these things were sold to them. Ethiopia, which is now communist, and Libya, which has been supplied for years and a bosom buddy with Moscow. All of them which with shield and helmet, so their military arsenal is going to be intact. If the United States is warring in the Middle East, and if we're being tied up there with all of our military personnel practically, and then the rest of the military spread out in 140 countries around the world, where does that leave protection for the homeland? A few rubber bands owned by the citizens won't do much damage. Verse 6, Gomer and all of his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north country. These are the satellite countries around Russia. And all his bands with many people with them. So this is the communist world. Be you prepared and prepare for yourself. This is Russia. You prepare for yourself, you and all your company that are assembled unto you, and be you a guard unto them. So they have manufactured weapons, sold them to all of these countries. The ones that couldn't afford to buy them, they furnish them to them. Once they come into their orbit, they don't let them leave. Even though there's a pretense of leaving socialism, they haven't left it. Those 10 new countries that were former communist countries are still socialists, even though they've now joined the European Union. Well, Europe is socialist. It's been that way for years. There have been people that fled from Great Britain because it became so socialist. Went to Canada and it became so socialist, they finally fled to the United States. And now this is the last place to go. And it's becoming so socialist, there is no place to retreat. Verse 8. When are all these things going to happen? And after many days you shall be visited in the latter years. Yes, the last days. You shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many people. The northern 10 tribes of Israel went into national captivity. They were sifted through the nations. They went to their new homelands, but they lost their identifying sign, as the tribe of Judah did not, of keeping the seventh day Sabbath. So they think they're Gentiles today. And it's very interesting. May 1st, 2004, when the European Union ceremonies were going on and they were inducting 10 further nations, the delegate for Ireland, who hosted it in Dublin, Ireland, had as one of the people who were to entertain those representatives from all these 24 other countries, had a poet who wrote a poem specifically for the occasion. He introduced it by saying, when Ireland was first invaded by the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Dan. And then on forward, we've had an Irish Republic. That's what he meant. So he admitted right on worldwide television that the tribe of Dan is the one who conquered Ireland and lives there till this very day, without even knowing what he was saying. And so we settled all of these countries that had nothing but what they called Indians in them. They didn't have the advanced civilization, but here we were. We brought it to these countries. We built them and made them the most powerful nations on the face of the earth. The most economic prosperous, because in 1 Chronicles 5, 1 and 2, God said it would be upon the head of Joseph. He would be the one that would get a double portion of the birthright of wealth. The other of the 10 tribes of Israel, they also are powerful economically, but not as the United States and Great Britain. So anyway, he says they will come with a sword and gather. They will, in the latter days, you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, the captivity of 721 to 718 BC. It's gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. And when you read Genesis chapter 48 and you see old Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and he said, let my name, Israel, be named on them, the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. This tells us exactly who is going to be invaded in the last days. They have the technical right to the name Israel. Judah, you can find that they, in Zechariah 12, 13, and 14, were to resettle in the Middle East. And it calls them House of Judah, distinctive from the 10 tribes of Israel. Who is it that international communism, this includes China and Russia, have always targeted for the final blow before world government? It's always been the United States of America. Less or so Great Britain, because we're the ones now that is the most powerful on the face of the earth. And so they said it would come onto the mountains of Israel, but is brought back out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. You shall ascend and come like a storm. You shall be like a cloud to cover the land, you and all your bands and many people with you. Thus says the Lord God, it shall also come to pass that at the same time things shall come into your mind, and you shall think an evil thought. They're going to try to plunder America. They're going to try to take all of our military equipment away from us. They're going to try to take our agricultural lands from us, all of our cattle, what gold we have left, anything of that sort. And you shall say, I will go to the land of unwalled villages. This proves this is the United States. It's not the Middle East. The Jews in the Middle East have locks on their doors, double locks, deadbolts. They carry guns on their hip to protect themselves. This is a place where you would never think that anyone would ever invade you. I will go to them that are at rest. Most Americans would never even conceive in the depth of their heart that there would ever be an invasion of a foreign power in this country, because they dwell safely. They dwell without walls, fortifications built around us. They neither have bars nor gates, showing that we live in a peaceful society. But they're coming to take a spoil, take a prey, to turn your hand upon the desolate places. Yes, they're going to come. They're going to try to take everything that we have. This is the purpose of the Middle East incursion right now. Whether we realize it or not, and those that are the players on the world scene realize it, everything is getting set up the way the Bible says it's going to. They may not realize why they're doing the things they are. I doubt that they do, except some of the higher Illuminati who worship Lucifer, and he tells them personally. But the normal person, like a George W. Bush, even though he is in Skull and Bones and he's in the secret society and they're working for world government and he knows it, he doesn't know how Bible prophecy is going to be fulfilled, and he doesn't know that he's one of the actors on the stage. He's simply there doing what he's supposed to be doing. One of Saddam Hussein's heroes was Ho Chi Minh. He was very successful in orchestrating the Viet Cong guerrilla war against the United States in Vietnam. Saddam Hussein studied his tactics very well. Yes, there was a war in Vietnam in which the Americans had vastly superior military equipment. Yet we couldn't even defeat that little country of Vietnam. All because of this thing called terrorist activities. There were no battlefronts. There were no uniforms. Everybody looked like everybody else until the bomb went off, blowing up American soldiers, those who would cooperate with America to make the government so unstable that there would be no one to govern. Saddam Hussein closely studied the Vietnam War. He studied America's defeat. He studied Napoleon's defeat as he invaded Moscow. He had no resistance when he went to Moscow, only to be worn down by irregular soldiers called guerrillas. And then he was defeated. He studied Hitler's failed siege of Stalingrad. What was the turning point? He wanted to study the successes and the failures of each of these. He studied the success of the French resistance during the Nazi occupation of France. They were terrorists. They looked like every private citizen. He studied the defeat of the Russian military in Afghanistan by the Mujahideen guerrillas in the 1980s. Saddam was a little more intelligent than we gave him credit for. He studied America's defeat to the urban guerrillas in Somalia during the 1990s. He knew what he was doing when he let America just march right on in and take over, and America thought the war was over in no time. And since then, we've had more troops killed and wounded than when we were going in to take the cities of that country. Saddam was a pretty smart man, trying to be fair and balanced, as Fox Television wants you to believe. So it should be becoming very clear now that Saddam's strategy never was to stand up against the American military and their superior forces. His strategy was to allow us to come in with no resistance. Our tanks would move up to the borders of the cities. We'd show it worldwide on satellite television, our tanks moving down the middle of Baghdad, the other cities. Then when we had our 150,000 or so troops in there, they would begin little by little. The Republican Guards, no longer with uniforms, but armed. Their armament stashed away, would fade into the crowd. They would change their clothes and their boots and put on civilian clothing. They would hide their AK-47s and their other weapons that they would use, and then launch their guerrilla resistance against American occupation forces, because he had studied history well and he trained his people very, very well. Just like in Vietnam, the United States became demoralized little by little as the guerrillas continued to blow people up, kill them. They would die on the side of the road, and little by little, America finally decided, let's get out of here, and they did. This is what he's banking on. Even though he may be captured, or it may be a double, we don't know. We'll wait and see when the time comes. William Safire, who's a syndicated columnist and has columns that go all over newspapers in America, wrote in the New York Times, I quote, "Due to guerrilla warfare, troop losses drove Clinton out of Somalia, Eisenhower out of Lebanon, Johnson and Nixon out of Vietnam. 1 or 2 U.S. troops killed every day in Iraq will ultimately demoralize the Americans and bring about public pressure for a United States pullout from Iraq." End of quote. Saddam Hussein understood this very well. If there's going to be any military peace in the Middle East, there's going to have to be military force, and it's going to have to protect the city of Jerusalem and its borders from the Islamics. There is no other way to do it. The only way, if it continues as it is today, there will be more suicide bombers. When you have 180 million people who are radicals to train and believe in their cause and will die in martyrdom and are taught that if they die as a martyr for the cause of jihad, they'll go to heaven and have 70 virgins waiting for them. That's a pretty good incentive for most young men. Pretty good. It wouldn't be for us. We know better. But for them, they don't know any better. And when they're taught that right out of their Quran, then what are they going to do but believe that it's got to be true? Part of Saddam's guerrilla warfare for Iraq that has been implemented by his loyalists, whether Saddam remains alive or he's dead, it would not matter, is to murder as many collaborators. Any Iraqis that collaborate with Americans, they're called moderates. So they're to kill them. That's why they bombed the United Nations headquarters over there. That's why they're bombing police departments over there that are trained by Americans and paid by Americans. To be exact, the entire program for America, for Iraq by America, is to finance everything. We're financing the restructuring of their country. We're paying all of their police officers. We're paying their military. And since there's 70% unemployment because of what is happening in Iraq, guess who is supplying the food also? Iraq has become a welfare state of the United States of America. No wonder we've been told by the head of the Federal Reserve System to expect inflation and a rise in interest rates. Hundreds of such of these guerrillas masquerading as private citizens have been murdering moderates. It's a fact. They've been showing it on television. They've been trying to kill United Nations personnel. They've been trying to kill Red Cross workers, journalists, contractors that are in the region. They have tried to stop all construction in Iraq so the country could not be governable, so the people would turn against America and ask us to leave. That was exactly what happened in the Union of South Africa, and they lost. All of these guerrilla tactics successfully utilized in 15 years by the communists down in the Union of South Africa. They were trained, they were financed by Russia and Cuba, and they finally overthrew that government. Do we think that it's going to be any different in the Middle East when they are financed by Russia, when they're trained by Russia and Cuba? The United States was going to overthrow Cuba, and they got a veto. This has been of recent times because of its supplying military equipment to rebels in South and Central America. And now they're supplying the Middle East. So communism isn't dead. They've camouflaged themselves as a democracy, as having a new type of monetary system. They've gone underground. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, for at least 30 to 40 years, since they were trained at Cuba by the Russian KGB and GRU on terrorist tactics, have been keeping the Middle East in turmoil. They've been killing innocent men, women, and children of the Israelis and others who happen to be at any of these spots where the bombs go off. Yet you have moderates who do not want to participate. But the radicals merge right into the moderates. They look like them. They act like them until the time comes when they have to get their bombs out, when it's their time to be the suicide bombers. To be exact, every single tactic that's being used in the Middle East right now against America is the same tactics that originated with Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and every other communist country and all of their revolutions around the world. There is no difference. It's a blue book, and Saddam Hussein took it right from Zhou Enlai and from Mao Zedong. So the guerrilla tactics that are being utilized there are right from their textbooks on guerrilla warfare. There is not one iota of difference in what the Russians and the communists have been doing and what they're doing in the Middle East right now. Another problem that Iraqi moderates have is siding with America. If they side with America, then what are they going to do when America decides to pull out? If America does decide to pull out. Well, what happened at the Bay of Pigs? Everyone that cooperated for that invasion were killed by Castro. What happened to those in Vietnam that worked with the Americans? Well, when it fell in Cambodia and the rest of the countries, every one of them that sided with America were killed. What about the Shah of Iran? Those moderates in Iran, when the Shah fell in 1980, immediately the Ayatollah Khomeini killed all of those that were friends with the West. Does the Iraqi people really, really want to side with the West? Some do. But it's a very dangerous situation for their lives if they do. If they become police officers, if they become mayors, if they become government officials on the side of America, and if America ever decides to pull out, because America has a history since Vietnam of leaving people stranded. What about in Iraq? In 1991, 1995, 1996, the Shiites and the Kurds were slaughtered by Saddam Hussein when America withdrew and left them defenseless. And so it's very dangerous to side with America in Iraq today. They know it. These people that are the leaders of the community are not ignorant. They know history. And they know the history of their own people, how vicious they are and how they go by Islamic law to the letter. And if you steal a pumpkin one day because you're hungry and they cut your hand off for it, what are they going to do to somebody that sides with a great Satan, as they call us? When they have their opportunity, those people will die also. So what they're shooting for is long-term guerrilla warfare tactics that will be lethal to Americans and Britons and any other country that were to send in any of the people into the Middle East. They hope the long term will prevent any type of American influence in the Middle East, so that a democracy, as they call it, will not be set up in that country. They don't want our Western type of morals, since the biblical morals would not be the ones that are exported there. Saudi Arabia, however, is a different situation than Iraq. Even though we're moving our military bases into Iraq out of Saudi Arabia has been one of the leaders in financing terrorism. They have bought off, bribed every single government official in the Western world. That's why we haven't gone forward and attacked Iraq or Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a very close friend. Its head with the Bush family has been. They used to vacation together. We've proven that, even with pictures. And so what about Saudi Arabia? On July 14th, 2003, the Washington Times reported that U.S. officials suspect that Iraqi guerrillas around Fallujah are backed by groups in Saudi Arabia. The New York Times has reported that Syrians and Saudis, and there's 3,000 Saudis that just disappeared from their homes. Men. Nobody knows where they are, supposedly. Well, you know where they are. Because even though they're all different nationalities, they're all Arabs, even though there's 12 different groups of them. And they all look alike, just like British and Americans until the British speak. They'll learn to speak English one day. Or is it us? Oh, me. But anyway, you have going over there Yemens, Algerians, Lebanese, and they're all paid for by the Saudi government. Yet the United States says nothing to Saudi Arabia, even though it's come out in the news media. Could it be that all of this activity in the Middle East is what's going to drive the forces to where Israel will accept someone to protect their borders from the Islamics? The Bible didn't tell us why they would be surrounded. It only said, when you see this surrounding, know that the desolation is near. So what's really behind America's war in Iraq and the long-term occupation of that country that has been called for? I've given you some of the background as to what is happening, the bloodshed, the purpose, what they're trying to do, terrorism. But why did America really go there to begin with? Did they sell them all of this weapons of mass destruction materials so that they could use it at a later time as an excuse to go into the Middle East? Probably not, but it could be. There is a strategy, though, behind our Middle East incursions, and it has very little to do with a 9/11 terrorist attack on America. It has very little to do with Al-Qaeda or the Iraqi connection with global terrorism, because Iraq was not even a major player in that respect. It has very little to do with Iraq being a threat to America in any way. And it has very little to do with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which were never found. Although we did sell them, and there is evidence and proof of it, we sold them the chemical biological agents so they could manufacture it, and they did, and just moved it 6 to 12 months before the war began. They knew there is a reason why we went into the Middle East. All of these items were and are of concern to American officials. I understand that. They've said it publicly. But were probably not the real reason why we invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein. He was an evil butcher. We know that. He killed a minimum of 300,000 to 500,000 of his own citizens when he was in office. But America was tolerant toward far worse dictators than he was without going to war to destroy them. Saddam was only a minor threat to America when compared to Syria, Iran, which already has the capability of building their nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia, who could cut off all the oil and America would go shut down. We wouldn't need lightning to knock our lights out. All we'd need was the shutting off of the oil. They're no bigger of a threat. Don't even stand in the way of China and Russia as the major threats, or North Korea, who has already gotten their weapons of mass destruction, at least 2 nuclear bombs. No, all of these are more important than Iraq would ever have been. And yet here we were going in and invading the Middle East. So what is this program? What is the reason why we really went into the Middle East and Iraq? We went in to secure the oil fields with a large and permanent U.S. military presence in the Middle East so that we could always control the oil. They had a plan for the 21st century where America would rule the world basically without interfering in other people's affairs unless they stepped on our toes. And a part of that plan was that they wanted to control the Middle East oil, because the Middle East oil is what makes countries of the world have lights, electricity, their manufacturing plants run, their military equipment can only run on oil and gasoline that comes from the Middle East. That's why America went in there. And a second reason for America's invasion and their already announced long-term, up to 20 years occupation, is that Iraq is a much larger, long-term, strategic place for the United States to have their military bases. It's right in the middle of all the countries that have the oil. The United States could move very rapidly from one country to the other and could secure the oil for our own selves. Of course, the British want this too. Just like we've studied in times past how the British want to have a world government. And that's why Cecil Rhodes founded his Rhodes Scholarships, to teach people how to build a world government under basically British and American control. And this is what they're doing. So there's different fronts on the world vying for world government. But if this Middle East participation were to call for America being so disarmed and all of our military sent all over the world, what could happen behind the scenes? What could happen to America if we were to see that we're securing the Middle East for our future, for the 21st century, and that we would live a good lifestyle? But what if all of our military was taken out of the country? We would be like Rome, spreading our military so far that finally we couldn't protect our own homeland. And the barbarians came in and overran the capital, Rome, and destroyed the country. Is this what's going to happen to America? After all, when you look in Daniel 11, the longest prophecy in the entirety of the Bible, when you start down in verse 40, it says, at the time of the end. So the setting is the time of the end. Shall the king of the south push at him? Well, who is to the south and so on of Israel? All the Islamics. All the Islamics. They cover Egypt, Iran, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Jordan, which is a moderate country, ally of ours. But it says he'll push at him. Well, he pushed at him all right, and the United States invaded. But was it a legitimate push? And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots. Now, we're a part of the NATO alliance. NATO and Europe. We're the ones that are the king of the north. After we fought all the battles and took over from the former king of the north, Rome became the king of the north. And America's allied with it through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And it said they will enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land. So eventually Palestine will be occupied, and many countries shall be overthrown. And these shall escape: Edom, Moab, and that's Turkey, and the chief of the children of Ammon, that's Jordan. Both of them allies of the West who have had moderate Western-style governments in the past. He'll stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, because it's Islamic. Some of the top Islamic terrorists are found in Egypt. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So two more communist-controlled countries, Ethiopia and then Libya, having ties with communist Russia, will be ready to be invaded by the time all of these things happen. So the Middle East isn't finished yet. It's leading up to something, because you see in verse 44, and America is no longer defended. We could not stop missiles that came over the North Pole or from submarines, any missiles, not one. That's a statistical fact. But tidings out of the east that's communist China. And out of the north, communist Russia shall trouble him, whoever it is that's involved in the Middle East. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and ultimately to make away many. So Russia and China is going to get into the fray eventually. They just are. We've already seen it in Ezekiel chapter 38. They are coming onto the mountains of Israel. And the time setting is when there is going to be Middle East activity. As we close in on the time of the end, and then when military occupation may be surrounding Jerusalem to separate them from the Islamics. It's coming. Bible prophecy is leaping off the pages right into our living rooms. We have to understand what is about to occur. They want the new American century. This is what our government wanted. They sat down in 1997 and drew up the whole blueprint for invading the Middle East, and Iraq was the one. This was not just an afterthought. This was thought up in the Clinton administration, then carried forward only after they had an excuse, the 9/11 episode of the Twin Towers. Then they began their war on terrorism. It was the Islamics in Afghanistan, and then immediately they went straight to Iraq, their targeted country to begin with back in 1997. And then if necessary, they'll go right into Syria, they'll go right into Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they'll occupy them, control them totally, all for oil, so that the new American century can be fulfilled. Communist China and Communist Russia are going to be two of the greatest threats of America in the future. These factors cannot be overemphasized because Russia is building and putting all they have into their military equipment. China is building at a pace that outranks anything that has ever been recognized in human history right this moment. They have been inundating the Western Hemisphere with cheap products. The products may be good. The clothes may fit on your body, a little off shape, but still fit on your body. But all their money goes into the military. They are preparing for an invasion, and it's not going to be just an invasion of little Taiwan. It's going to be the Western world, because they have said as late as 1997 and 1999, 3 different occasions, that if we don't be careful, they'll nuke Los Angeles. And they have the nuclear weapons to do it. They're building updated, modern, sophisticated, long-range nuclear-tipped missiles. When they can send 10 nuclear tips on each one, all they would need would be approximately 16, and 10 hitting each major city in America, and we're done. That's all it would take. So they're not very far behind their schedule of being ready for invasion. And I've already mentioned how that the Russians are the ones who have prepared for this terrorism in the Middle East, prepared the terrorists, trained them, put the money up, so that now this jihad war against the great Satan is going to take place. It's not going to slack up. America is in for a long war. They're probably going to bring back the draft. They're already talking about it. Because as American boys come home and they tell of what it's like over there, nobody wants to join voluntarily hardly anymore. But why are all these things happening to America? Is it because we just like to stick our nose into other people's business? Or is it because we have turned our back upon the living God? After all, God was the one that said that the 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, would receive the greatest recipients of the birthright of anybody on earth. They would be rich beyond the wildest imagination of the rest of the world. Even those that live in the slums of America are living like kings in comparison to those in most places in Africa. And especially in the third world countries and then in communist countries where they're controlled. In the Old Testament of our Bible, as we call it, in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, I'll just mention this in closing today. Verse 1 to 14 says that if we would obey our God, and we know that's the Lord Jesus Christ and God the Father that sent Him to be our Savior. If we would only obey Him, all of His laws, statutes, and judgments, then God would bless us with every wonderful, wonderful blessing that could ever be hoped for. Not a child would ever be born that would not be healthy. There would not be sickness, disease placed upon us. It wouldn't be here. We would have the best crops, rain in due season instead of violent storms. We would have every blessing that a person could ever want. But then, in verse 15, and this parallels Leviticus chapter 26 also, then he begins to say, if you will not obey my voice, the voice of the Lord your God. That means if we become a nation of baby killers, if we become a nation that believes in husband and wife swapping, adultery, fornication, lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, the pride of life, all of these things that run rampant even among supposedly Christians. If we become a society that takes LSD, that takes all the other drugs to alter our minds, if we get our minds off of God, that means that if we as a culture that has been declared February 29th, 1892 in a 9-0 decision of the Supreme Court that we were a Christian nation, but if we turn our back upon the Christian principles and allow promiscuity, homosexuality, all the other sins of the Bible, all of them can be repented of and as a nation. But if they're not, if we allow them to continue and we live in a cesspool of immorality, then starting in verse 15, he began to list all the way through the rest of the end of the chapter. I think it's verse 68. All the things that would happen to us, the curses, how that our children would begin to be born with diseases. They would be birth defects. How that crops would begin to be destroyed, and now we see the genetically altered and modified crops. Our cows and cattle would begin to have diseases. We've already seen in Great Britain the mad cow disease, in America the mad cow disease, but it's been hushed up even in Canada. And then even on some of the charts in the nurses' homes, when people are dying from certain diseases, they're now putting CJD on it. Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is the same as mad cow disease, only it's in human beings instead of Alzheimer's. And so they're beginning to discover that we as America are becoming sickly, weak. Our economy is being destroyed because of inflation over printing of paper money. Wars that runs up the profits for a few, but it debilitates the rest of the economy. It automatically doubles the prices of everything every 10 years. And so when you think you get a raise on your job, all of a sudden inflation takes away the raise you got, so you're no better off than you were. God said all these things would happen. He even went so far in the latter part of this chapter, he said that a nation from afar off that would be a bitter enemy, that would hate us, would even come. We would not understand their language. And he would allow it to happen to punish us for our sins. This is the nation I'm talking about as a whole. Private individuals can change their hearts and minds. Private individuals can become Christians. They can reach out for that divine protection that I preach about so many times. But the nation as a whole is different. America has turned away from the values which made us a great nation, the biblical morals of our forefathers that founded this nation. We've now embraced promiscuity, homosexuality, the killing of unborn babies. We now wife swap, husband swap, and every other swap there is, just like they ended up doing in ancient Rome. Their morals fell. Their morals were great when they were on the rise. But when they rose to the top, and in the latter days of the Roman Empire, they abandoned all the values. America has now abandoned all of its values that it once retained, that the world could look to and say, you are a great nation because of those values. We were a great nation because we were good as people. Even though all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, basically, as good, decent human beings, based upon the principles of the Bible. But now we've turned our back upon God, except for the few here and there. America is at a crossroads. Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, warned ancient Israel. The very same warning can be given today in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15 to 19. See, I've set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in His ways, to keep His commands, His statutes, His laws, and so on. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you're drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, and when you look in America today at the number of people who are palm readers, who are involved in witchcraft, demonism, it's a flood. We have turned as a nation to other gods, Eastern Oriental religions. He said, and you bow down and worship them. Whatever form, whether you stand in a corner, get down on your knees or what, you still have contact with them. Then you won't live long, God says. This day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to His voice, and hold fast to Him. Brethren, you and I have a unique opportunity in all of history. We're seeing the very prophecies of the Bible being fulfilled before our eyes. We're watching the decay of a civilization. A great civilization where the one true God of the universe was the head of it, was the one who sponsored it and gave it its spiritual values. But since the inhabitants have turned their backs, you and I as individuals can retain that greatness with God, because we can love Him with all of our heart, soul, and mind, while the rest of the nation will go into the sewage pile. Brethren, it's our choice. And I encourage you as individuals to make sure that Jesus Christ and no one else is the leader in your life.
Hello again, brethren. Thank you for joining us. And I hope everyone enjoyed the message today titled, The Middle East Trap for America. Well, what'd I tell you? That was a great message today. Now, last week I mentioned that I would be working in the studio during the 4th of July, trying to get things functioning again, which I did. However, I did find out that I need a few more items to make everything function properly. Now, one of our brethren brought me a new video camera, which I've been trying to set up in the studio. The extra equipment that I need for that will be here next week. What I'm currently using is my handheld DSLR camera. It snaps pictures, but it does also have capability for video. But it's not actually designed for that. Now, for those of you who have donated specifically to the camera project last year, those funds are still in the bank. I have not invested them yet. I will probably end up using them to supplement the costs that are incurred to purchase the equipment necessary to allow us to record the messages during this year's Feast of Tabernacles, though. One of the main issues that we ran into when planning for the feast is that we automatically assumed that there would be internet connectivity. And we didn't find out until after we had made the reservations that there was none. So my intentions were to do live streaming broadcasts for each day of the feast, but we may only be able to afford to record them for playback at a later date. Now, there are some things that I may be able to do to be able to still do live streaming, but that will cost another $1,000 for that equipment, and that's on top of what's needed just to do the daily recordings. And that all depends on how much money I can scrape together. So please keep in your prayers that we can acquire the funds necessary to at least accomplish the video recordings of the feast messages. That's my primary concern anyway. Now I can afford to purchase the sound system and the lighting necessary, so we will at least have audio recordings of the feast messages. But I would like to get a more robust camera that is designed specifically for live streaming, as well as a laptop and the software to accomplish it, which is where I may be supplementing the costs with the funds that y'all donated last year. Now, if I'm able to acquire the necessary funding, then last year's donations will remain in the bank and be used as they were originally intended for the equipment needed for right here in the studio. Now, since this is our first attempt at putting together our own Feast of Tabernacles, it's been quite a learning experience, which will enable us to be better prepared for next year's Feast of Tabernacles. So remember, you're all invited to join us at Lake Brownwood State Park in Brownwood, Texas, from September 15th through September 22nd or 23rd, depending on the sighting of the new moon of the 7th month, which should be on the evening of August 31st or the evening of September 1st. The 7th month dates are subject to move one day forward if the crescent is not seen on August 31st. Now, the last new moon sighting in Israel was on the evening of July 4th. The next projected sighting of the new moon in Israel will be on the evening of August 2nd. And at that point, I'll have a better idea of when the sighting of the new moon of the 7th month will take place.
All right, brethren, at this point, I would like to mention that Brenda Smith would like to extend gratitude for everyone's continued support, as demonstrated through your tithes, offerings, donations, and prayers. And remember, all of your support is a tremendous help. So, if you found this ministry has been a blessing to you, we would like to ask if you would also be a blessing to us. Whatever the good Lord moves you to give, and your finances will, of course, allow, will be greatly appreciated. You can send your tithes, donations, and offerings to Post Office Box 36, Waxahachie, Texas, 75168. Again, that's Post Office Box 36, Waxahachie, Texas, 75168.
So we'll keep a watch on the new moon sightings, and I hope you'll all join us for this year's Feast of Tabernacles. And thank you for joining us today. Until we meet again, do not accept the mark of the beast. And let's make all our days worthy of God's blessings. May you all have a blessed week, and goodbye for now.